Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Bet. Welcome to Masechet Avodah Zarah. Very happy to have you. If you're new, well, welcome. If you don't have bookmarks yet, so the PDF of the bookmarks is actually in today's Daf post on our website. That has it has a checklist of the dapim. It has musagim, concepts that appear in the Masechet that you can always refer back to. And if you want to order from us, if you don't have them, if you have Nezikin, then you've gotten that and you should go find it. If not, and you want to order, you can email us at info@hadran.org.il. Okay, if you want to subscribe to receive the podcast or WhatsApps every day, all that information is on the subscribe page on our site. Anyway, we're really happy to have you in this Masechet, and we're going to get started. So Masechet Avodah Zarah is Masechet Avodah Zarah is sponsored by the Talmud class of Congregation Beth Jacob in Redwood City, California, in honor of the staff of Hadran who make learning possible. Pirkei Avot teaches us, make yourself a Rav and acquire yourself a companion. We are blessed to have Rabbanit Michelle Farber as our extraordinary teacher, and we, Leslie, Joe, David, Sue, Helen, Batya, Adam, Alana, and Bill, are blessed to have the companionship of our learning. Very beautiful dedication. Thank you. And today's daf is sponsored by Lisa Malik and Professor Eddie Weiner in honor of the upcoming wedding of their daughter, Ava Weiner, who was just promoted to Director of Jewish Affairs for the state of New York and Governor Huchel's executive chamber. Apologize if I don't know how to pronounce his name. And in honor of their future son-in-law, Reuven Rosen, who just graduated with honors from Rutgers MD PhD program and who will be starting his medical residency at NYU. And with that, we will get started. So the first question to ask, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in introduction, and for that we have Dr. Ayelet Hoffman-Lipson's introduction. You can listen to her Shiur. It's an excellent Shiur, which always Shiurim are right, spot on. They give you perspective on the whole Masechet and always insightful about something going on within the whole Masechet. Okay, but I will start with the question of why this is here, Avodah Zarah, in the middle of Seder Nezikin. What does that have to do with Nezikin? Really, it doesn't have a lot to do with damages at all. So Tosfot talks about this and says, really, this is coming after Sanhedrin. And the reason it's coming is because it's talking about Avodah Zarah, and Avodah Zarah was mentioned as one of the punishments you get the death penalty for, and therefore it really comes after Sanhedrin. But we actually had two Masechtot in the middle. We had Makot and we had Shvuot. Well, Makot, we already said, was a finishing up of Sanhedrin, really like an added part of Sanhedrin, or a part that was originally part of Sanhedrin and cut, right, and separated. And then we have the Shvuah, which we talked about, also related to Shvuat HaDayanim, things the judges, oaths that the judges impose, connecting with the Sanhedrin. And therefore, when we're done with all that, now we go back and we talk about Avodah Zarah, and this Masechet is going to deal with both the prohibition of worshiping idols and much more so about our interactions with Gentiles, okay, in many different areas. So with that, we're going to get started. The first thing we have is lifnei eidaihem shel goyim, or avdei kochavim. It depends what version you have in your text. Lifnei eidaihem shel avdei kochavim shlosha yamim asur lasef latei imahem. 3 days before their holidays, we're talking about this word eidaihem, which means holidays. 3 days before their holidays, you can't start doing business dealings with Gentiles. Lahashilanu l'sholmehem, not to borrow from them or to rent, not to loan them thing or let them borrow things from you, and not to borrow things from them, which could also be renting. Lahalvotanu levot mehem, to give them loans or to borrow from them. Lipara'anu lifra mehem, to pay them back or to take back loans from them. Okay, all those things are forbidden 3 days before the holiday. What's the issue? Well, Rashi explains that 3 days before the holiday, just like we are before our holidays, for Pesach, before Sukkot, right? We're busy getting ready for Shavuot, right? Maybe a little less preparation, but got to make those cheesecakes or prepare your shiurim if you're giving shiurim. So before all the holidays, we're always doing preparation, whether it's food preparations, other preparations, building the sukkah, getting the matzah, all that. Kasher in your house for Pesach. Okay, they have their own things they get ready, right? The food or whatever else they're getting ready for their holidays. And if you start doing business dealings with them, they'll say, "Oh, wow, it must be I just got a good business deal. It must be because of the gods. It must be because I'm busy dealing with the holiday." And therefore they'll go thank their gods. It's interesting. Like you might say, I have a good business deal. I thank God any day. Not only if it was a holiday, I'd see that God's hand was in that. But the Gentiles and their idol worship less so. But when it's their holiday, they really, will connect it, and then they'll thank their gods on your behalf. And that's a problem either. I'm going to talk about this, the machlokah in the Gemara later on, either because Lifnei iver lo titei mechshol, you're causing someone, putting a stumbling block, causing someone to worship idols, or because, right, remember, it's one of the 7 Noachide laws not to worship idols, or because it says in one of the psukim that the name of Avodah Zarah lo yishama al picha. The name of other gods will not be heard from your mouth. Now, that's a bit of an indirect thing. And here what it means is if you cause someone else to mention the name of the idols, then you're responsible as well. Okay, there's a negative prohibition about that. Okay, so therefore, we're not allowed to do this. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and this is an interesting debate, reprimands, what do you mean? Of course, you could take back a loan from them. That's not something they're going to be very happy about. You just made them spend all this money. That's actually bad for the Gentiles. So there's no concern like we talked about before. Amrulo, they said to him, even though it might be hard for him right now, actually it's a relief of a big burden. And therefore the rabbis think that this is a good thing because he'll be happy, a day later he'll feel relieved that this loan was paid back. So it's an interesting debate about whether paying back a loan is a positive thing for a person, makes a person feel good, or actually makes them feel worse because they had to put out all this money. Now the Gemara starts with a machloket Rav and Shmuel, but not a typical machloket Rav and Shmuel, but actually on the word eidaihem. Now in our Mishnah it appears with an aleph, but the machloket's going to be Rav Shmuel chad tane eidaihem with an aleph, the chad tane eidaihem with an ayin. And one says it's eidaihem with an aleph, one says eidaihem with an ayin. Now we're going to understand what the difference and where each one gets it from. Now, either which way, it's going to mean the same thing. It's a holiday of the Gentiles. So it's really not a very substantial machloket in terms of content. But, and before we start on this, I actually want to mention something, I forgot, on the Mishnah, which is Tosfot and many of the Rishonim in the medieval time period asked this very important question, which is, the Mishnah says very clearly you can't do business dealings with Gentiles 3 days before their holidays. However, they basically comment on the fact that everybody does this. People are all the time doing business dealings with Gentiles, and they don't all of a sudden stop and say, well, not today because it's their holiday. Okay, and forget about the fact that, Sunday was a Christian holiday every week. And then 3 days before, you're not going to do with them? So basically, they struggle with the fact that the Mishnah says something, and the halacha, and right, halacha is one way, and practice is different. So there's many different answers to this question, not for a Daf Yomi Shiur, but I will mention some. Tosfot mentions a few. Many of them he rejects and then has his own opinion, but I'll mention even the ones he rejects. First, he suggests that the Gentiles in their day are not, he actually calls them the Gentiles shebechutz la'aretz, outside of Israel, are not actual real idol worshippers. They're just doing it because that's what their forefathers did. So they actually are worshiping idols, but they're not really doing it because they believe in the idols. So it's more like a ritual that they do, but not having any meaning. And therefore, it's not like they're going to go to their gods and start thanking them for the business dealing that took place. Tosfot actually rejects that option. Tosfot suggests another option, that it's because of Eva, okay, as the Gemara is going to quote later, which is that if you stop doing business dealings with them, they're going to hate us, right? They're going to see that we don't do business dealings with them before their holidays, and that's going to cause animosity, and that's going to cause bad relations. Okay, and the third possibility he raises is, and this is the one he really accepts, is that the people who we are dealing with don't worship idols, right? The Christians weren't idol worshipers, and therefore, and that's a big heta we've talked about before, the Meiri is big on this, and many of the sugyot that talk about idol worshipers, that the Gentiles, most of the Gentiles in the world at this point are not idol worshippers. Okay, again, it depends where there are some who still worship idols, but the majority of the ones, especially in the places where the Jews were interacting with them, were not actually idol worshippers. But in general, I'll just point out, like I said before, there's many Rishonim who try to offer solutions to this problem, because it's very interesting always when what you see on the street doesn't match what the halacha is, and then how the rabbis grapple with this. And there's no real answer to that question. In each case, they sort of attack it from a different, right? Depending on what it is, they try to figure out a solution. So now we're going to go through what's the difference if you say eidaihem or eidaihem, not really what's the difference, but why, okay? Or what's their source to say this is with an aleph or this is with an ayin. So man detane eidaihem lo mishtabish, man detane eidaihem lo mishtabish. The first the Gemara says, if you read it with an aleph, you're not wrong. If you read it with an ayin, you're not wrong either. Each one has, as we say, yesh al mi l'smoch, has something to rely on. Every time we're going to start with the one with an aleph first, because if you're not following inside, you won't know what I mean, because they both sound the same. So the one who says with an aleph is not wrong. Why? Because the day of their, now this actually means the day of their destruction. It's a pasuk from Devarim, Sefer Devarim. Kikarov Yom Edam, the day that they will be destroyed is close. Now, the day they will be destroyed is not a holiday, but maybe some people say, well, first of all, it just has to do with gentle idol worshippers, so therefore it connects. And therefore we'll say, oh, the word eidaihem, right, is a holiday of Gentiles, just like eidaihem is the day they get destroyed, or the day they get destroyed is going to be, right, it's going to undo their holidays. In place of their holidays, the same way we say Tisha B'Av is going to turn it to the opposite, right? From a day of mourning to a day of happiness, their holidays are going to turn to days of sadness, the days of their destruction. If you say it with an ayin, you're not mistaken, because what is eidaihem? Testimony. Now, dichtiv yitnu eidaihem v'yitzdaku. This pasuk we're going to learn very well soon. We're going to get to a drasha about this whole pasuk. But yitnu eidaihem v'yitzdaku is said rhetorically. They're going to bring their eidim, their proofs. What are their proofs? That they worshipped idols, and they think they will be justified in front of God. Okay, the pasuk starts off, and we'll see this a lot later, which is all the Gentiles are going to gather together. And all the nations will gather together. Mi bahem yagid zot, who will say this? V'rishonot yashmi'eni, and the first ones they will hear, this isn't so clear what this means, will be heard, sorry. They will give their testimony. And will they be justified? And of course not. And then they will hear and say truth. Now, this is a very complicated pasuk, hard to understand what it means, but right now they're assuming this means the Gentiles are going to think that they can bring their proof that they worshiped idols and will be justified. Of course not, right? They will not be justified in what they did. So after we explain why we could say it's with an aleph, why we could say it's with an ayin, now we move on to say, well, why didn't each one say it like the other? If you say eidaihem, my time eidaihem. If you say with an aleph, why don't you say with an ayin? The one who says that. Amalach tavra adif, because they preferred to choose a word that described destruction when it came to the Gentiles. Because again, they were their big enemy. And why the one who said an aleph? Why ayin? Why didn't they say aleph? Amarla, what caused them to be destroyed? Right? They preferred to take this, but it said the Gentiles are going to testify on their own, and right, and on account of that, they'll be destroyed. It's because of what they did, they're going to cause their destruction. So better use the word with an ayin. Hilkach edut adifa. Therefore, edut is better. Okay, with an ayin. So now they say, wait a minute. Wait, who says that pasuk is talking about the Gentiles and it's said rhetorically? No, Habi Yisrael Ktiv. That pasuk is talking about the Jews. Now, remember from the, right, it's quoted in the Haggadah, it's a pasuk from the Torah, but what are the edut? Edut are mitzvot, really. So, Da'amar Rabbi Yishua ben Levi, Kol mitzvot Yisrael osim ba'olam hazeh, ba'ot u'midot lahem la'olam haba. Okay, all the mitzvot the Jews are going to do the Jews do in this world are going to come and stand for them in the world to come. Okay? They will show, right, they will be testimony for the Jews that they're deserving of getting into the next world. It's not rhetorical. They will bring, the first part is talking about the Jews. Now remember, the Gentiles are going to come. Then the Jews are going to be proven to be right. Elu Yisrael, they'll bring their testimony, their mitzvot they did, and they will be justified to get into Olam Haba. So who's going to hear and say truth? That's the Gentiles' reaction. They're going to see the Jews were right, and then they're going to say, that must be truth. They're going to recognize God, recognize why the Jews were right. Okay, so that can't be the source for eidaihem, being Gentiles, because it has nothing to do with Gentiles, it has to do with the Jews and the mitzvot. Right? It's interesting that the same word can be used to explain mitzvot and Gentiles doing idol worship. Kind of like Elohim, could be God, could be Elohim Acharim, other gods. So Rav Huna Bar Yoshua comes and says, eidaihem comes from this pasuk. Yotzrei pesel kulam tohu. Those who create idols are all nothing. V'chamudehem bal yo'ilu, and the things that they are beloved to them will not do anything for them. Ve'eidaihem hema, and these are their testimonies of their actions, which are bad. And their eidaihem means the idols, and therefore it can connect to the holidays of the idol worshippers. Now we're going to start this big long drasha, which is going to eventually, not today, in the next daf, is going to come back to this pasuki, eidaihem v'yitzdaku. So Darash Rabbi Chanina bar Papa v'Tema Rabbi Simai. Atid lavo, mevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sefer Torah minicho b'cheiko. In the future, God is going to sit with the Sefer Torah in his lap. Okay, this Midrash is giving God human personality traits or human physical traits. V'omer, kol mi she'asak ba yabo v'yitos charo. Anyone who learned Torah will come and get rewarded now. Okay, this is in the future, in the world to come. Miyad mikabtzim u'ba'in umot ha'olam b'rabuvya. And that's what this pasuk is talking about. In a minute, we'll see where we get to the Sefer Torah in God's lap, but we're going to start with the beginning of the pasuk. Kol hagoyim nikbetzu yachdav. First, they all come together. Okay, so all the Gentiles are going to come together to try to get into Olam Haba, right? Push down the door, all the people there. Comes God and says, I don't want you all coming in one big clump. I want each nation coming separately with its scribes, okay, it's important people, turning out on the bed. Shene'emal, as it says, v'yasvu le'umim. The next words of that pasuk. Now, theoretically, this is all one and the same. They're all going to come together. They're going to gather together, right? The nations, it's all the same thing. It's said twice, which is just, usually the way poetry goes. But they're going to say here, no, those are two different things. First, they're going to all come together, yachdav. Then God's going to separate them and say, let's get organized here. I want organized lines. I want each nation on their own. Okay, ve'ein la'om, because it says ve'yasfu le'umim. What is la'om? La'om is nation, right? Ein la'om elo malchut. That's each nation, right? Each kingdom. Shneimar la'omi la'om ye'ematz. Okay, as it says in the bracha to Esav and Yaakov. In the not the bracha, the prophecy they get about Rivka when she has Tomim, and therefore it's going to be that means each nation. So now the Gemara is going to ask 1 minute. Umikir buvya kapeshmaya kamiya kadosh baruch hu. Is there a buvya before God? Why did God need to organize them? Well, God didn't know who was from what nation. Of course, God knew everything. God doesn't need that. God didn't want them mixing up with each other for their own sake. God wanted his word to be heard. He wanted them to clearly understand it. And the only way to do that is to separate them by nation. Because if you have everybody together, it's a balagan. Nobody can hear anything, right? And people say, oh, I didn't hear, I didn't understand. Okay, so now what happens? Okay, Malchut Romi comes first. Okay, now what does this mean? So, right, the first nation is Rome. Why Rome? So the Gemara says, "My time Mishna Chashive," because they were the most prominent. Okay, Minal Chashive. How do we know this? Dichtiv. Now this is in the prophecy of Daniel, and the first nation he describes in his prophecy is his pasuk. Okay, Vatuchal kol aro tidushena v'tidukena, and the whole land will be destroyed and it will be trampled and basically turned into dust. This is Malchut Romi, which is the worst of the worst. Okay, that its reputation was known in the whole world. Okay, and therefore they were the prominent ones. Okay, and they went first. So now we're going to ask, where do we get this? That the most important prominent nation is the one who goes first. Like when it comes to, this is the nations being judged. So they're coming to judgment first. Well, Kid Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Chisda, as Rav Chisda said, Melech v'tzibur, Melech nichnas tchila. If you have the king and you have a nation, and they need to be, right, like a lot of people, and they need to be judged, the king goes first. How do we know this? Shene'emal, by Shlomo HaMelech, when he dedicated the Beit HaMikdash, said, La'asot mishpat avdo, mishpat Amo Yisrael. This is a place where God will do just judgment for me, his servant, that's Shlomo, and mishpat Amo Yisrael, and the nation. Okay, so there you have first the king, then the nation. Tamamai, what's the reason? Two possible options. It's not appropriate to leave the king standing outside. Some people say it's because before God gets too angry, beforehand we were giving physical traits to God, now we're giving personality traits, that people get angrier as the day goes on if you're a judge, because you're seeing all these bad people and evil things go on, and the more the day goes on, you get more tired and you see more bad things and you get angrier. So when God is judging the people, he's going to get angrier later in the day. So let the king come first before God gets more angry. Amar Lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So here's what God says to Malchut Romi, the Roman kingdom. B'mai asaktim. What did you do? You might remember this from Shabbat. I think it's Lamed Gimel, the famous story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Romans, and Yehuda ben Gerim, and the whole thing about, what the Romans did. Was it good? Was it not good? And they used the same language about the merchatzaot and the shvakim and all these good things they did, which maybe were good, maybe weren't good, and that's what we're going to see here. So they did all these things. They made marketplaces, they made bathhouses, harbe kesef zahav rabbeinu. We made lots of silver and gold. Kulam lo asinu. All these things we did. Ela b'shvil Yisrael. We didn't do only for, meaning We did them for the Jewish people. We had all this wealth and all that in order to help the Jews so that they wouldn't have to worry about all these things. We made them markets, we made them this to make their lives easier so they could be free to learn Torah. And that's the whole idea is, what did we do for Torah? By the way, it's interesting. We said before the Jews are responsible if they cause Gentiles to worship idols. This way, the Gentiles saying we're responsible for causing the Jews to learn Torah. We didn't learn Torah ourselves, but we did help them. Enablers. Amar lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shotim Shabbalam. God said, you stupid people. You did this all for your own sake. You have marketplaces for prostitutes. You wanted to beautify yourself. That's why you had bathhouses. Kesef is a hav. What about the silver and gold? Shaliyu. It all belongs to me. I gave it to you. Shneimar liya kesef liya zahav no Hashem tzvaot. Quoting the pasuk, all the kesef, all the silver and gold is mine. So now, going back to the pasuk. Okay, the pasuk said, okay, and they all came together and they all claimed, we did good things. Comes God and answers, mi bahem yagid zot. That's the pasuk, and now we're going to darshan this. Klum yesh bachem yagid zot, shneimar mi bachem yagid zot. Okay, is there anyone here who could say, I did this, meaning I learned Torah? How do we know this is Torah? Well, ein zot ela Torah, shneimar v'zot ha-Torah shem sa Moshe. Famous pasuk, right? And this is the Torah that Moshe put. We say it every time we lift the Torah. Zot is obviously a reference to the Torah in that pasuk. This, by the way, there's a pasuk in Yeshayahu and Gimel, pasuk Tet. You want to look it up. So basically, he said, well, did you learn Torah? Miyad yatzu b'pachei nefesh. They immediately leave, very upset, because they realize they have no chance. Okay. Next thing. Yatzu machut Romi. Even if nasa machut paras achareh. The Romans leave, the Persians come in. My timer, why they come next? Because they're the next in line in significance. And how do we know? So continuing in Daniel's prophecy, and after that, right, behold, there was a chaya who came after the first one, who would look like a bear. Vitani Rav Yosef, from Rav Yosef explained, Elu Persiim, these are the Persians, shochlim v'shotim kidov, they eat and drink like a bear, Mr. Balim basar kidov, they're overweight like bears, they have a lot of meat, flesh. Migalim se'ar kedov, their hair is long like a bear. Ve'en lam menucha kedov, and they're restless like a bear. Right? Bears are always pacing up and down. Amar lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'may asaktem. So God says to them, same question, what did you do? Omrim lefanav, they said to him, very similar to the previous, but mildly different. Ribono shalom, harbe ksharim gasharnu, we made lots of bridges. Harbe krachim kabashu, we captured lots of lands. Harbe machamot asinu, we had lots of battles. All this we did just so the Jews could learn Torah. Amar lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kol ma she'asitem l'tzarach atzmachem asitem. You did for your own sake. Tikantim ksharim litom meches. You wanted to get taxes, so you made bridges and took taxes from it. Krachim, right? Even then they had bridges. You had to pay money to get across, tolls. Krachim lasabem angaria. You captured villages or cities so you could take the people and make them work for the king. Milchamot. Ani asiti, just like the third one. Kesef v'zahav was mine. I did the wars. Shneimar, Hashem ish milchama. God is the man of war. Klum yesh bachem magid zot. Okay, so your first claim wasn't good. Do you have anyone who learned Torah? Shneimar mi bachem yagid zot. Ve'ein zot ela Torah. Shneimar v'zot Torah shel sa Moshe. Again, based on the pasuk mi yagid zot, that's the Torah. Can you say you learned Torah? Miyad. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to tell you this. The zot. What's the zot? Zot is always pointing to something. That's why it says God was sitting with the Sefer Torah. Mi yagid zot, that they did this. And he points to the Torah that's in his lap. They leave God very upset. Now they ask a question. If the Persians saw the Romans, that their claim wasn't accepted by God, why did they try? Didn't they know that it wasn't going to be accepted? If the Persians said, look, they destroyed the Beit HaMikdash and we helped rebuild it, so we might have a better chance. And now, instead of telling the story over again, they just said, and the same happened for all the other nations of the world. So now they ask, okay, wait a minute. If each nation thought the one before it wasn't successful, or really the Persians and the Romans weren't successful, why did they come? Because the Romans and the Persians both ruled over the Jewish people and subjugated them, and we did not. So they thought that perhaps they had a chance, but no one really had a chance because none of them really were involved in Torah learning. Another question before we get to the continuation of the story. Why were the Romans and the Persians mentioned by name and these other nations weren't mentioned by name? Because the Persians and the Romans, their kingdom continued until the days of the Mashiach. In fact, very fitting to be talking about this right now while we're in the war with the Iranians, because Persia, right, is Iran. And we still see that we're fighting them to this day and they still exist. Again, whether they're the same ones or not, that's a whole different story. But anyway, I just thought about that when I read this line. So now they say, okay, here's the next claim. Did you give us the Torah and we didn't accept it? You didn't even offer it to us. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, what do you mean God didn't offer it to them? Right? Can you say this? It says, God came from Sinai. Sounds like God also came from Seir and from Teman besides Sinai. What was he doing in Seir? What was he doing in Paran? Reference to a very famous midrash that God went to every single nation and none of them wanted the Torah. Okay, right? We all learned this. I mean, I learned it when I was little in school, right? Also comes up in the Gemara. Famous story. Until God comes to the Jewish people and they accepted. Okay, so that wasn't their claim because they didn't accept. It was clear they were offered the Torah and didn't accept it. So let's try attempt number 2. This is what they said. Did we receive it and not keep it? That's okay. We didn't receive it, so we didn't receive it. We didn't keep it. Why are you blaming us? So that doesn't make any sense, though. That's why they should be destroyed. That's the whole point. Why didn't you accept the Torah? That's a very bad claim. Oh, we didn't accept it, so what do you expect from us to keep it? But why didn't you accept it is the problem. So that's not a good claim. So attempt number 3. This must be what they said. We didn't want to accept the Torah, but you know what? The Jews didn't either. And why didn't you force us to accept it by putting it, right, turning it upside down in our heads like a basin and forcing us to accept it like you did with the Jewish people? Also another reference to a very famous midrash. Because it says in the pasuk they gathered in the bottom of the mountain. The way they understand the bottom of the mountain is under the mountain. Right? How could you go to the bottom of the mountain? It sounds like you're underneath the mountain. How could they be underneath the mountain? Well, Amar Dimi Brachama, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Har Kigigit Al Yisrael V'Amarlem Imatem Kablim Et HaTorah Mutab Lo Sham Take Voratchem. Right? God put the mountain on top of them like a upside down basin and said, if you accept the Torah, great. If not, mountain's coming upon you and you're going to be buried right here. And they had no choice. So the Gentiles said, why don't you do the same for us? Miyad Omer Lem Kadosh Baruch Hu, and now we go back to the pasuk and we try to understand the end of the pasuk. Harishonot Yashmi'unu, or not the end of the pasuk, but the next part in the pasuk. We'll get to the end of the pasuk in the next step. So Mi Bahem Yagid Zot, it said in the pasuk. V'Rishonot Yashmi'enu. Okay, and the first ones will make it be heard. Shneimah V'Rishonot Yashmi'unu. What does that mean? Sheba mitzvot shekibaltem echan kiyamtem. Rishonot, they're the ones who are going to be the telling ones, meaning you had mitzvot you were supposed to do and you didn't do them. The 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach you had and you didn't keep them. That's why I knew that you weren't in it. Even if you had accepted the Torah, you wouldn't have done it. And therefore I didn't force you to accept the Torah because I saw that the ones you had and you had already accepted, you don't even do. How do we know they didn't keep the 7 Noachide laws? Okay, I'm going to already prepare you. We're not going to get the full answer today. We're going to try explaining this pasuk in one way, which is going to be a ridiculous way, and they're going to retry it tomorrow into the next stuff. So God, it says in this pasuk, God got up and measured the land, and then saw and vayater goyim. We're going to have to understand what this yater goyim is. So it's a pasuk in Chavakuk. What did God see? God saw they had the 7 Noachide laws that they didn't keep. And that's how we see it, they didn't keep the Noachide laws. Now what's this vayater goyim? Well, since God saw they didn't keep them, he made them permitted to the Gentiles. Since they weren't keeping them, he made them permitted, to which the Gemara says that's ridiculous. Itaguri, what they get rewarded because they didn't keep it, so God just took it away from them and said you don't have to do that. We see that if you sin, you actually get rewarded because God, right, lahatir means, right, vayater is lahatir, to permit. That would be ridiculous that God permitted it. So you'll have to wait for it to see what Mar Bered Ravina says. That will be in the next step. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with this halacha 3 days before their holidays. We can't do business dealings, any kind of business interaction with them for fear they're going to thank their gods. Rav and Shmuel, one said with an aleph, one said with an ayin. From there, we went off. Why did each one say what they said? One of the suggestions that was rejected is that eidaihem comes to this specific. You knew eidaihem b'yitzdaku. In the end, we said, no, that's not a rhetorical question saying what you think the Gentiles are going to get justified if they come bring their gods, that they worship idols. No, no, no. It's actually talking about the Jews. The Gentiles are the next part of that, which we haven't even gotten to yet. And now we're going on this long midrash about what's going to happen in the future when the Gentiles come to get rewarded, and God's going to say, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And the Gentiles are going to say, but well, no, what about this? And we're going to have the whole discussion of what this pasuk means according to the midrash. And with that, we'll continue in the next daf, which will go up after today's daf. If you're new, I'll already tell you that Shabbat's daf goes up on Ready Friday morning, and you'll be able to learn it before Shabbat if you wish to. With that, wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Mazal Tov to all those who are finishing Shavuot. Our Siyum will be on Sunday, so we didn't finish yet together. And I will teach the last daf, and we have a great lineup with Sissy Turner and Caroline Musen-Berkowitz, who will be doing a Siyum Hashas with us. Okay, looking forward to seeing you all there.